Good day to everyone joining us, and welcome to today's X-Talks webinar. Today's talk is entitled Food Safety and Supply Chain Traceability, a Holistic Approach. My name is Ryan Muse, and I'll be your X-Talks host for today. Today's webinar will run for approximately 60 minutes, and this presentation includes a Q&A session with our speakers. Now, the webinar is designed to be interactive, and webinars work best when you're involved, so please feel free to submit your questions and comments for our speakers throughout the presentation using the questions chat box, and we'll try to attend to your questions during the Q&A session. This chat box is located in the control panel, which is on the right-hand side of your screen. And if you require any assistance along the way, please contact me at any time by sending a message using this same chat panel. At this time, know that all participants are in listen-only mode, and please note that the event will be recorded and made available for streaming on xtalks.com. At this point, I'd like to thank both Aptean and Adroit who developed the content for this presentation. Aptean is one of the world's leading providers of industry-specific software. Their enterprise resource planning and supply chain solutions are uniquely designed to meet the needs of specialized manufacturers and distributors. With both cloud and on-premises deployment options, Aptean's products, services, and unmatched expertise help businesses of all sizes across many industries to scale and succeed. Adroit was founded to transform the performance of the farm-to-table supply chain. After decades of specialized expertise in the industry, they know that the most successful organizations are agile enough to respond to changing market demands and consumer preferences, while staying ahead of increasing requirements for quality assurance and multi-channel competition. I would now like to introduce our speakers for today's event. Jack Payne is a director of solution consulting, food and beverage at Aptean, focusing on food and beverage ERP. Payne originally joined the organization nearly 30 years ago with Ross ERP and spent much of that time working closely with manufacturers to understand their challenges and tailor the development of the product accordingly. Over the years, Payne has collaborated with customers, industry analysts, and developers to create a strong vision for ERP solutions and has become a well-respected industry resource for best practices and future technology advancements. Richard Sides is the founder and CEO of Adroit North America. Richard brings his 30-plus years of manufacturing and technology experience, having served as a senior executive for several companies, including Ultra Consulting, Preferred Meal Systems, and Ramco Systems Corporation. He has a deep experience within the food and beverage industry, having started his career at Kraft Foods. Richard has his BS in computer engineering from Lehigh University and an MBA from DePaul University. And so now, without further ado, I'd like to hand the presentation over to our first speaker today, Jack Payne. You may begin when you're ready.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us today as we spend more time talking about food safety and traceability. And just want to give you a brief introduction to Aptean. We are a mission-critical software provider for industry-specific solutions, of which food and beverage is one of our key or strategic solutions that we do support. We're over 400 million in revenue, 2,600 employees globally, and over 6,500 customers globally. But as we talk specifically about food and beverage customers, we have over 1,000 food and beverage customers, and in our logo list of customers, there are probably a number of names here that you recognize, probably a number of names that you do not recognize. We do support the full supply chain from farm all the way through distribution, and for all size companies, from smaller companies looking for their first enterprise system to larger enterprise-wide companies providing solutions for all types and all sizes of companies. More than just enterprise resource planning or more than just ERP applications, we do like to provide a full complement of applications to support the digital transformation for all food and beverage organizations to deliver results for them. Well, let's get into more about today's topic of food safety and traceability. In late 2020, we commissioned Reuters to do a survey for us of over 300 C-level executives as well as thought leaders in the food and beverage industry to give us their thoughts on the impact of the pandemic, but more importantly, what were the trends that they were seeing and what were they preparing for going forward into 2021. And there were several topics that were asked of these executives, and several of these responses I do want to share with you. One of those topics is, what did they see that was going to impact the industry the most in the next 5 years? And each respondent was asked to give the top 3 of those items they're going to impact, so you can see why the totals add up to more than 100%. I think, the top 2, 1 and 2, are almost tied at first between changing consumer demands and sustainability. But then if we look down at number 3, traceability demands, and number 5, regulatory changes. But I really see number 4, emerging technology, is more the digital transformation of how the industry is now going to react and how they're going to be able to address the changes or the trends in the industry for the next 5 years. So to me, that puts traceability and regulatory at a very solid, number 3, number 4, and they kind of go together anyway in terms of what's going to impact the industry the most in the next 5 years. Along with that same question, we asked the 300 plus respondents as to what they saw as their biggest threats in the next 5 years. And what was quite interesting with this was digital transformation is how they're saying they're going to address the trends, but they also saw lagging behind in digital transformation was one of their biggest threats. And one of the other things that we've seen from this is that, unfortunately, the pandemic occurred, but that did highlight the needs for digital transformation to be able to stay competitive, to stay up with industry, and to be agile to make the changes that are needed with this. But also along with this, regulatory changes. And again, I kind of pull into this, traceability, food safety, regulatory changes was in the top 5 threats as well that they see facing over the next 5 years. Now, lagging behind in digital transformation as a threat, but also as a means to addressing these challenges, we also wanted to find out what do they see as the benefits, either perceived benefits or benefits they have already had seen from digital transformation with this. And again, give us your top 3. And the top 3 that came up into this was supply chain operations, data capture, and reporting analytics. But of course, I had to go in and analyze this a little bit further. And as I analyzed it, the number 2 and 3 of data capture and reporting analytics, to me, are elements of digital transformation. To me, I don't really classify these as benefits to the business and being able to, capture the data better, faster, more accurate. Whether you're doing that through barcode scanning, you're doing that through various devices, or whatever with that. I really see that as an element of your digital transformation. And also being able to report and analyze information is going to give you the information to then make changes and make improvements. So when I kind of take those 2 out, well, what's the real benefits to the business, and get the top 3, in addition to supply chain is number 1, improvements in production number 2, but also tied with that with number 2 is our topic today, quality control, food safety, traceability, as key benefits coming from digital transformation. But if we go ahead and look down the rest of the list as well, we'll see that basically all areas of the enterprise do have improvements and benefits from a digital transformation process with this. And then we got a little bit closer to you and said, well, what's your priority focus for the next 2 years? Sustainability, reducing waste was number 1, but behind this, number 2 and number 3 was, again, food safety, traceability, and also exploring blockchain to extend the traceability outside of our 4 walls to the full traceability from farm to fork has been discussed. And just kind of a quick little discussion is, what is digital transformation? I'm sure that each of you are familiar with this, and each of you may actually be in the process of your digital transformation journey. It's more than just putting in sensors and reading data and reading information. It's really a business transformation that relies on technology as a backbone, but also it influences business processes and cultural and organizational changes. And I think it's all about the journey, because you're going to be making improvements and seeing benefits during the journey. It's not so much the destination. So a good example of how this may change the business processes and make organizational changes. Today, you may have certain people that spend 80% of their time gathering information to then take 20% of the time to analyze and make change from it. So as we go on that digital transformation journey, as we're gathering that information, we're looking at analytics and predicting analytics. So maybe that 80% of the time that's used in gathering information, maybe that reduces to less than 20% of the time, and hopefully that reduces to minimum amount of time, so that we can now spend the maximum amount of time on analyzing information and determining what improvements and what changes can be made. Now, in today's webcast, we do have two polls that we'd like to get your input on. And I'd like to turn that over to our moderator for the poll. And then after that, I'll turn it over to Rich to talk more about the food safety and traceability.
Excellent. Yes. So our first poll question that we have for everyone today asks, where are you in your digital transformation journey? This question should be appearing on everyone's screen right now. You can interact with it by selecting on any of the answers you see in front of you and then clicking submit. The answers are: you have not started, you've just started the journey, you're making good progress in the journey, you're advanced in digital transformation, or you've reached the destination. The answer again is where are you in your digital transformation journey? We'll give everyone a few seconds to consider an answer and then submit one to us. We greatly appreciate you taking the time to participate in this. All right, it looks like most of you have voted. Thank you very much. Let's take a look at how the results have come out. All right, 25% of you said you've not started, 50% have just started, 25 are making good progress, but that's as far as we go. Thank you very much for your participation. And now I'll hand things over to our next speaker, Richard Sides, to continue speaking today. Richard, you may begin when you're ready.
Thanks, Ryan. We put a lot of thought into the topic, or the description of the session for today, and we kind of settled it on the word holistic. And the reason for that is to do a transformation of a digital transformation like Jack introduced within supply chain really requires a cross-functional view within the company, as well as a cross-organizational view across the supply chain. And it's not an easy, but it is a necessary transformation that we all have to undertake. We have to look at, much as Adroit looks at, the full supply chain from agribusiness through the food and beverage processors, the cold chains logistics providers that are enabling the transportation, as well as the distribution, and even into retail. All of these elements and all these types of organizations are interconnected in the supply chain. And for us to really do the type of traceability that's necessary, we have to look at all these organizations all the way through. And then within the organizations, we need to look at it from a food safety perspective in terms of what are the regulations, what are the processes and procedures within food safety, what are the enabling technologies such as Aptian's just food ERP solution, as well as within the food supply chain and the connectiveness, and that's hence the interest in blockchain and those types of programs. So from an Adroit organization perspective, these are really the three areas that we've bundled our services with, in fact, a large mission around accomplishing the supply chain traceability across the supply chain, as well as ensuring within the individual companies that we have the right processes and procedures and technologies. So there's really three major change trends that are kind of intersecting right now, which is pushed us to a point where we really can't ignore, as much as we potentially would like to, we really can't ignore the changes that are coming in terms of requirements for supply chain traceability. The first is a consumer change trend, a change force in terms of consumers demanding more transparency and more vision into fresh and regulatory, much as Jack showed on the polls that they did. The second is from a government perspective, and I'll cover this, major changes underway within the United States, but also globally for demands for improved connectedness and traceability. And then the third is the evolution of the technology. And as the technology is evolving and those capabilities are becoming apparent, the regulatory bodies are picking up on those technology trends and using it as an opportunity to try to force and to try to drive improvement in the food safety and the traceability. And this really kind of dates all the way back, really starting in the 90s, with brand protection initiatives. There's an organization out of Belgium called the Global Food Safety Initiative that was started and really kind of set the initial standards for food safety. And a lot of the schemes that you'll see, like SQF, et cetera, are kind of keying back in on initially GFSI. And then in 2011, with the Obama administration, there was an introduction of the Food Safety Modernization Act, which further codified the need for food safety systems and processes, et cetera. And the schemes then adjusted to include those requirements. And now, most recently, the FDA has released what they're calling their new era of smarter food safety blueprint, which we'll kind of talk about. So within the Smart Food Safety Initiative, Frank Yanis is the Deputy Commissioner of Food Policy and Response, and has a number of now podcasts and website links, et cetera, where they're really trying to brand and to bring greater awareness to the need for smarter food safety. And he's really focusing in on technology-enabled traceability, which we'll talk about today, smarter tools and approaches for prevention and outbreak response. And the outbreak response is part of that recall aspect of the trace and recall. And then he's also focusing on food safety culture and new models, business models, et cetera, that as those come to light, how can they be leveraged to improve food safety as well? So the FDA is quite far along in consideration of a new rule called Section 204, which is mandating additional requirements for additional traceability record for certain types of food. So they took a look at the population of food safety incidents, et cetera, that had occurred and flagged a number of food types and put them on a list and have mandated additional traceability around that. That rule has been through consideration and comment and is now really kind of into the rulemaking phase of it. So we can expect something from the FDA, and we would think in the next few months in terms of initial proposals on 204 in terms of their requirements or strong suggestion of adoption of these rules. There probably could be some additional comments coming back from industry on it, but this is something that is they're moving forward with. Exact timing remains to be seen, but it's something that we need to be aware of and prepare for. But it's not just the FDA, right? So across countries, across the United States, et cetera, there's a whole range of additional regulatory actions that are taking place to further ensure safety of the food supply chain. So in terms of 204, as I mentioned, it's for certain foods, and really what it's looking for is establish clear tracing of the food product source, where did it come from, where is it at in every step of the supply chain, and a standardized approach to traceability systems. There's a lot of ambiguity and a lot of questions around this rule yet, but the spirit of the rule is to enact improved traceability for the foods through the supply chain. The quote voluntary adoption of these practices industry wide, but again we we kind of really need to see how this plays out because it's complicated. But the FDA is kind of recognizing the trends of blockchain, the trends of technology, and how this stuff should come together across organizations as well as inside organizations. And so we're going to need to really pay attention to it. So this is the most significant change force in terms of driving the traceability is the FDA's heavy focus on it. And with that, it's really a recognition that paper-based traceability solutions are going to quickly become unacceptable due to the necessary interconnectedness of the lots, the food lots, and the food information as it traverses the supply chain. So whereas before you could have like your own internal lot numbers and you could be kind of jotting stuff down on pieces of paper and kind of in sort of a wash basis, that's becoming more problematic because you're going to need to capture and really, as we kind of understand it, the FDA is kind of looking for some standardization in terms of those lot codes and the flow of the lot codes across the organizations to improve kind of the dependencies. So these are the initial list that they put out, and again, we can expect that this list will probably grow over periods of time. But each of these you can kind of trace back to some specific incidents in the past. You know, there was some politics around this, I'm sure, but this is their initial list of traceability from farm all the way to table. And so now our challenge is participants in the supply chain is to come up with a holistic approach in terms of how do we establish a response to this smarter food safety initiative. And to do that, we really need to take an integrated and cross-functional view of the business work stream and the associated business systems inside the four walls of our facilities, but then also how to integrate in supply chain traceability systems. And we need to, you know, preferably enabled with systems, establish a formal recall program. What you see here are all the bullets that are associated with the SQF scheme. It's pretty complicated. There's a lot of elements to this, and it requires some forethought and some design. And the reality is that it typically, even today, and this is kind of the big gap between what we see happening in industry and where we're at in terms of the FDA's perception and FDA's requirements is today when we walk in, we tend to still see lots of standalone systems or standalone records versus an integrated system such as Jack's talking about with Aptian. We tend to see lots of things in binders with manual checklists, et cetera. Or in response to that, we'll also kind of on the other end step into companies where they have very complicated, lots of pieces of systems that are kind of talking to each other and in terms of a best of breed or best approach. And really what we need to do is take a step back and kind of reimagine this overall system context to have kind of a more inclusive architecture and to be better positioned to communicate across the supply chain. So within the four walls, you know, literally every work stream, source to pay, how do you buy, receive, pay for product, touches food safety. Every one of these work streams touches food safety, and it's important, hence the need for integrated systems. And then it just gets that within the four wall challenge then becomes sort of multiplied as you step through the supply chain. So there's a number of enabling technologies that we can expect over time in response to this traceability challenge that we can kind of layer in, with ERP kind of being a core element, and then branching off of that would be a governance regulatory compliant solution, similar to like what came through with Sarbanes-Oxley in terms of what are the defined procedures, and then where are there exceptions to the procedures? How do we demonstrate statistically that we're in compliance? How do we flag as a management team where we're out of compliance? So we anticipate this GRC layer to become more important, working in concert with the ERP system. And then a series of interconnected. So for example, for the response to the recall and incident, a CRM system, systems like ReposiTrak, where suppliers are registering that they are food safe in their food safe programs, and then blockchain initiatives like GoChain or IBM blockchain, et cetera, being put in place to enable the interconnectedness across the organizations. So as we look at the specifics in trace and recall, it's really about trace, record the case, assess the risk, key communications, trace to the source. Once we identify the source, trace back to impacted scope and execute the recall. And this looks fairly clean, but the challenge can become is that the trace to source can be back in the supply chain to earlier and earlier in the supply chain. And so it requires collaboration within the supply chain, not just within our organization. And so each organization in the supply chain is responsible for establishing a product trace system, ensuring that the records are retained and readily accessible, ideally in a computer system, and that they can, basically demonstrate compliance on this traceability aspect, right? So as and then be able to identify the scope, issue those communications, and execute the withdrawal. So a lot of elements, a lot of pieces just within the four walls of the firm, and then each firm within the supply chain has to have their own full set of things, and all this has to be connected. And so as you start getting into how do different organizations talk to each other, you start getting into standards of communication, right? All the companies need to speak the kind of the same language. And then kind of our next segment, we'll talk more about like, well, how do we deal with setting the standards, and how do we enact something like blockchain? But before that, let's kind of get into our next poll question.
Yes, so for our next poll question, the question we have for you all is, what is your method of trace and recall? Your answer options are paper-based files, spreadsheets, standalone traceability solutions, or included in ERP solution. As with the previous one, please take a moment to consider an answer, select any of the ones that you see in front of you, and then click submit. The question again is, what is your method of trace and recall? All right, it looks like most of you have submitted an answer. Thank you very much. Let's take a look at how those results have turned out. Coming in for 33% paper and based files, another 33% for included in ERP solutions, 22% have said spreadsheets, and then 11 coming in for standalone traceability solutions. Without further ado, though, let's move on to Jack Payne to continue speaking today. Jack?
Okay, thank you, Rich, and a lot of good information that you provided with that. And if I had voted on the how do we provide traceability, maybe the included ERP system might have been 34%. That's something that I've been a big proponent of for a number of years now. Not paper-based, not spreadsheets, not bolt-on systems. And one of the things I've observed, more than once in going through various facility tours, I haven't done that in the last year, but over the years, and I remember one specific company I went through, as I was watching the operator write down, this is the lot number that's going into the product we're producing. I went over and looked at what he wrote down. I could not tell, was this a 7 or a 1, or maybe it was a 2. And I called my host over and asked him if he could interpret it. It's like he kind of scratched his head as well and said, I'm not sure. So someone was taking down what the operator had written down, was going to transcribe it maybe into a spreadsheet somewhere, and that could be a break in the traceability chain of not having the right lot number with that. So I'm a big proponent of saying, you need to be looking for a food and beverage based ERP solution that does include full traceability within your organization, that then can provide the information to get into the greater, larger supply chain. So I just kind of put a mock-up here of a typical product I use a lot of times. For example, a common food that we probably all have at home in our freezer is a frozen pizza. And just looking at a very simple process for one, starting on the left, looking at our suppliers that we're buying the different ingredients from to make the pizza sauce, and then suppliers further down the page looking at, once we've made the pizza sauce, the ingredients to then produce the pizza, and then shipment of the pizza out to the various customers that we have. So I feel like a An ERP system should be able to track each one of these transactions along the way and be able to do traceability from any point, both backward and forward, with accurate, reliable data in a very reasonable period of time. And then I've asked myself, the question quite a number of times, and one of the reasons I like using the pizza example is all the different ingredients that go into pizza. There are a lot of different sources of these ingredients that come with this. So if we look at the pizza dough, that's coming back to the farm for growing the wheat. We look at the pizza sauce, that's coming back to the tomato farms and other processors and spices. The vegetables with the veggie farms. As we get into the meats that go into it, back to the farm, the livestock that's being processed, and then the cheese going back to the dairy. So when we start looking at this larger view from a supply chain wide traceability, how do we connect all the dots, or how many dots have to be connected with this? And so I've kind of said, well, let me just kind of take a rough estimate, and this is based upon my observations and being in each of these type facilities over the years. So if I start thinking about the dough, typically there's flour, there's typically baker's yeast, there's typically salt. There may be other ingredients, but these are typically at least the minimum ingredients you'll see in it. And then from the flour, that probably has to go back to the flour mill, has to go back to the wheat farm. There may be some other steps in the process, but at least a minimum of 3 steps with this. Well, we need baker's yeast as well, and that has to typically go all the way back to a sugar plantation that where we refine the sugar, and that then goes to a yeast factory to make the yeast. And then salt, typically is going to go back to the mine where the salt's being mined, and to a salt supplier. So we have quite a number of nodes as we look through the traceability just on the crust. But then as we start looking at the traceability across the pizza sauce, we have a number of nodes here, produce, quite a number of nodes here, through different produce distributors, probably an importer for the olives coming in. As we look at pepperoni, that's going to get quite complex if you have a combination of beef and pork coming together with this that has produced the pepperoni from a pepperoni supplier. And then similar to the cheese supplier, we basically have to get back to the dairy that's produced the milk, but we need the enzymes and cultures for the cheese, as well as typically the salt within it, back to the salt mine. So as I count this up, I'm thinking a minimum there's probably at least 50 steps in the supply chain, all the way back to the sources of this. And then as we go forward into typically in retail distribution, there are going to be a couple more steps going out to the distributor, from the distributor to the stores with this. So this is going to be, I think, quite a challenge, but it's something that as a consumer I would like to see this kind of capability for immediate response to recall. Because if I'm thinking about, well, what if there's a problem with the pizza? How long is it going to take to go back through every one of the sources and each one of the chains with this to do this? But we all start, locally. And when I say start locally, we start with the capabilities that we have in our existing system, that we can have common standards that we can then feed this data into supply chain traceability. So at a minimum, we need the capability to trace back. So we can trace a particular ingredient back to the source of the ingredient as to where that came from and all the usage of that, as well as taking an ingredient and now tracing it forward. Something like salt that we saw in the previous example on the pizza. Salt goes into many of those typical ingredients, but they're probably not all coming from the same salt supplier with that. So we need that traceability. Then also the full recall and notification capabilities. That first of all, we want to prevent by any kind of recalls by having all the proper food safety protocols, but we need to also be prepared for recall and notification in the event something does occur. So Rich, let me turn it back over to you to get your additional thoughts and information about our holistic traceability today.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. So kind of picking up on your last slide, the question is what do we do when we have an incident, right? And so there's a communication and a scope of recall and those types of things, but within organizations, really the FDA and kind of good best practices around GFSI, et cetera, are really necessitating that we have a defined procedure, incident management procedure. And what you see here is kind of an outline of a procedure, which is once an incident's been identified, activate a predefined traceability and recall team to manage the situation and assess the situation, and from there determine the severity of the situation and whether we need to do a recall, a traceability withdrawal, control for product disposition. The FDA maintains a registry that as incidents come up, depending on the severity, those incidents need to be registered to the website for a recall response. And depending on that severity, FDA then could step in and use its muscle to really kind of drive and force collaboration within the supply chain to limit potential impacts. The company should have a defined recall plan and activate that, and kick in public relations depending on the level and distribution, those types of things. Anything that's within their immediate area should be immediately be held, and then communication through the up and downward through the supply chain. And as the issue gets closed out, then additional reporting back to the FDA, et cetera. So it's serious business. Companies need to have these programs and procedures defined, and it's something that should be frankly rehearsed on a regular basis. And for key suppliers, conversations should be happening well ahead of any potential issues in terms of how this stuff should be handled. One of the things that's come and evolved over time, and it originated with the Bitcoin platform, is blockchain technology. And blockchain is really a platform that enables companies to interact with each other with confidence that the information hasn't been changed over periods of time. And so blockchain is kind of that enabler. And as we look at blockchain, we can kind of break it into sort of three views. The first is a platform view. So there's a number of competing platforms that are evolving over time. Ethereum, aka Bitcoin, IBM has its standard, some newer ones that are coming out, GoChain, for example. And these platforms kind of differ in terms of to what degree are the transactions spread out across the number of servers and computing platforms. And there's kind of views from a cost perspective in terms of what's the cost per transaction. And there's an environmental concern actually around the platforms as well, because of the amount of computing power that is being utilized on some of these platforms to a move to have a more efficient platform. Regardless, the idea is that participants in the supply chain need to adopt kind of a standard platform within the trading partners. And then within the trading partners, we need to define a set of standards for how the trading partners are going to communicate, what information is going to be captured at each step in the supply chain. What's, for example, like what's the lot code format, what's the description, what's the production date. The word date means many things to many different people. If I ask somebody like what's an on-time ship, for example, I'll get 5 different answers inside an organization. So there's a lot of work that has to happen in terms of defining the standards within industries across the supply chain. And there's a number of groups out there like GDST and GAA and BAP, et cetera, that are working hard within the trading partners. There's been a lot of work, for example, inside seafood from the point of capture or harvest through to processing. And then working within these platforms, there's a number of applications that operating, for example, IBM's Food Trust set of applications operates within IBM blockchain. Traceability operates within GoChain, and there's several others, right? So this is a challenge with adoption of blockchain, is that we're still kind of in our infancy in terms of getting these standards adopted, and we're still very much in a competitive landscape in terms of which platform and which applications. So while the FDA has kind of this theory around let's pursue blockchain, and we at Adroit are definitely in alignment with that, it's going to require collaboration within the supply chain to get to kind of a consistent standard, and it's going to take some time for that to happen, and certainly not in the next X number of months. So the FDA is going to sort of lay out a direction with Rule 204, et cetera, and tech-enabled traceability through those standards, and kind of apply pressure. But ultimately, it's going to require collaboration within the industry to make this happen. But as an example, the possibilities are frankly pretty cool, in that as product traverses and as actions happen to product associated with the lot, that information can be scanned into the database, aka the blockchain records, and as that information is scanned, and then as you receive that product and you scan the codes on the product, you'll get a history of everything that's happened with that product. You don't need to be too concerned about how does blockchain work, other than to know that it's a common platform across the supply chain, and then as lots are received into for your facility, and as you scan those using the blockchain capabilities, you'll get that history, and then the actions that you're taking on that product will also get recorded into the lot associated with the product and available for those downstream from you to consume and to understand what happened. And as the product is moving through the supply chain, it used to be consumers would say, I would like to know when I'll receive my shipment, and then that changed within logistics to, I don't only want to know when I'll receive the shipment, I want to know where my shipment is right now. And that's kind of the one of the allures of blockchain is that it ultimately will provide kind of a real-time snapshot of where everything is as it spreads through the supply chain. And with that, improved auditability and response. But again, it comes back to make all this happen, we have to have standards and collaboration across the supply chain. But in the end, once we have, and this is an example of transparency, but there's many others out there. In the end, once we have that traceability assigned, then we have within the four walls traceability that Jack was talking about with the individual ERP systems across the supply chain. And then the supply chain, those ERP systems are connected with each other via a common kind of traceability function enabled with a blockchain platform and blockchain enabled applications. So it's a big vision. There's a lot of work to make it happen. We at Adroit, we're starting to work with some of these various standard setting organizations, et cetera, to try to get some movement, and we're watching carefully what's going on within the FDA as well. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Ryan.
Yes, well, thank you very much for that insightful presentation. I'd like to invite our audience to continue sending their questions or comments right now for this Q&A portion of the webinar. I've already received some questions though, so we'll get ourselves started with those. Our very first question would like to know, what are the benefits of moving to cloud for digital transformation?
So Ryan, I'll take that initially, and then I'll turn it over to Rich for his response. This is something I could easily spend the rest of the time we have just talking about the benefits of moving to the cloud and how that helps the digital transformation, but I'll try to keep it short and succinct. I think the first thing is looking at, being on current technology. As I talk with, different companies where they're looking at replacing their existing ERP and moving to Appian, or either I talk to Appian customers, typically companies are involved in running their business. They're not, thinking about upgrading the ERP system every time a new version comes out. And I do find companies that may be 6, 8, 10, maybe 10 plus years behind, they haven't upgraded. And so when I start thinking about the Food Safety Modernization Act was signed almost 10 years ago, and now we have a company who's running on an ERP system that was released 10 years ago. Well, some of the newer capabilities that just need to be in it for tracking the data, as well as having the technology infrastructure to support what we're talking about from an overall supply chain, that needs to be updated. And that's one of the benefits of being on the cloud, is being able to stay on current technology, stay on releases from that. I think it's one of the key benefits. One of the other benefits is looking at business continuity. That's part of one of the key benefits the cloud brings to that, in terms of disaster recovery, or preventing disasters and disaster recovery. And also, unfortunately, what's become quite common today is the cyber attacks. And those of you on the East Coast of the United States know about the cyber attack that, as most consumers with gasoline over the last week, how that has impacted us. So I just think about what happens if there is a recall that occurs, but for some reason my system is down and I can't provide the information of that particular recall for a couple of days or a couple of weeks or whatever. So I think those two business assurances of staying on later technology, current technology, as well as having the business continuity, are not only big benefits to the business, but they're also, I think, key to being able to provide digital transformation, as well as, providing food safety and traceability. Rich, I know you've seen this, and what are your thoughts and comments about cloud for digital transformation?
Yeah, Jack, great comments. We just kind of spent a lot of time today talking about the need for interconnectedness across the supply chain. And when you take that need for interconnectedness and then you also merge in the need for security through that, it's just really rising to the level now that you really need to trust your stuff in the cloud with folks that are quote unquote security experts, best in class on properly secured platforms. And the amount of interconnectedness via web services, which are the means by which different programs communicate with each other, again, is just further enabled within the cloud. So we're a huge proponent of that, especially as we're looking to try to drive interconnectedness across the supply chain.
Excellent. Thank you very much. For our next question, they would like to know if you can elaborate a little bit on how long the digital transformation journey is typically.
And I'll start off on that one as well. So I think it should be more about the journey and less about the destination or completing the journey. Part of it's going to be, where are you at today in your capabilities from a digital transformation. I kind of see the foundation of digital transformation of three key components. One is a business system that is providing the information and the data, or collecting that information. Typically, it's going to be an ERP system. Depending upon the company, it could be an MES or it could be a CRM, but let's just say the business system, typically an ERP. So if you already have that in place that supports food and beverage and traceability, that's a big step along the way. Also, collecting the information, collecting the data. Do you have barcode systems for collecting and scanning information? Do you have MES systems or digital sensors for collecting information, so information does not have to be written down? And then what about analytics, so that you're not spending your time putting all the information into a spreadsheet, but you're having analytics that's providing those business insights to you. So I think that's the first step of that digital transformation journey. And then there are a lot of other parts to that. but you're going to see benefits along the way. You know, typical experts say that minimum is a 2 to 3 year journey with this. I've known companies that have spent more than double of that in the digital transformation journey, and they probably started the journey before the digital transformation term became a common term, not knowing that they were starting on this journey, but they were starting on business improvements or business transformation. Is what digital transformation is about with this. But I also think it's like continuous improvement, that there are going to be various projects along the way in continuous improvement, but there's always room for continued success or continued improvement. And I really think digital transformation or business transformation is the same way. You're going to, you know, go through the journey. You're going to have lots of successes through the journey, but those successes are also going to give you other, you know, visions of other ways that you can continue to get better and to improve. And Rich, I know you've met and worked with a lot of companies in the past as well, in terms of moving them along from business transformation and digital transformation. It's not an overnight process. So what are your thoughts, Rich?
Yeah, I don't know that I would look at it in terms of as of this date, our transformation is finished. I think it's a continuous improvement type of a mode. I think there's a kind of a catch-up phase that needs to go on, where companies need to look at their individual work streams. Like, so for example, I talked about procure to pay as a simpler one. What's the vision for procure to pay in my company? What are the metrics that we want to try to move the needle on? What information do we need? And what level of interconnectedness do we need to accomplish across the supply chain, not just within the four walls, right? And you need to apply that thought process to each of the work streams: procure to pay, quote to cash, incident to recall. Apply that same set of questions to that, and then as an organization, create a transformation roadmap for yourself. And that roadmap should really be updated every year. It should be, where are we at? What's the current state of technology and current state of best practices across each of these work streams, and where do we want to invest to move ourselves forward?
Excellent. Thank you very much. Our next question that we have for you would like to know, should I get my supply chain planning applications from the same company as my ERP solution?
Yeah. No, go ahead, Jack.
I was going to say, Rich, I'm probably a little biased on that, so I was going to really defer to you. I'd like to get your input on it.
I think the key is that if you look for a supply chain solution, you want to make sure that it's integrated and interoperable with the information. There's some fantastic best of breed, we'll call them, out of the box supply chain planning solutions. We certainly have ours that we like to work with, but there's also some benefits to having it from the same supplier. And it really kind of depends which ERP platform you're looking at. At the end of the day, it's more about, does that solution provide the functionality that you're looking for, which is an ability to understand the change, the demand or the supply signal change that's come in, and our response to that, and what's the impact of that response. So I would look at it less around same company, different company, and more of, what are your requirements, and does that solution best meet your needs, which would include the integration, et cetera. Thoughts, Jack?
Yeah, I definitely agree with you, Rich, with that. You know, even though we supply both supply chain applications as well as ERP applications, you know, I think it does need to be something that does have integration, you know, together with that, and can provide the capabilities that a company's looking for.
All right, excellent. Thank you. Our next question asks then, what about trace and recall for non-material related data, such as machines or personnel? Further, is this something that should be done, or is being done, or is important for trace and recall?
Yeah, so anything that's touching the food, we have to maintain records associated with it. So through production, for example, in the ERP system, you'll have routings, and associated with the routings, you'll have which work centers or which lines did the product run on. That information should be captured as part of the production run records. And so when you do your trace back, uh, you have to understand what came in contact with the food. Same thing in terms of as the food is moving through transportation, what truck was used, what material, handling equipment, etc. That all really technically needs to be traced. It's not just the lot and the ingredients; it's all the things that are potentially affecting the product. So, for example, packaging, if it's in food contact, that packaging has to have lot traceability as well.
All right, excellent. Thank you. Our next question would like to know what is needed to use barcode scanning.
And I think in this, there's several factors that have to be looked at. First of all, what is the benefit of barcode scanning? And we've typically seen, two chief benefits or key benefits in terms of accuracy, as well as, timeliness of information. That, like the example I used earlier, of somebody writing a number down, is this a 7 or a 1 or a 2? So it increases accuracy. But also, we're not waiting upon somebody to take that data and, key it in, whether it's an hour or a shift or a day later. But it, provides that timeliness of information with that. And so we need to look at this, throughout the four walls of the enterprise, from receiving goods from our suppliers all the way to shipping product to our customers. So, one of the first things is, do your suppliers have the capability to put barcodes? And typically, were they standard, a GS1 standard barcode that you can read and record that information as it comes in? Or do you need to, put a barcode label on each receipt that you do? And again, it's going to depend upon what type of product is being received in. So let's say that it's a pallet with, bags of sugar on it. I see it most common of putting a barcode label on the pallet and then recording that information. But depending upon how those bags of sugar may be used, it may be necessary to put a barcode label on each bag. Where I see that being more as a requirement is when you get into the protein industry, where typically you'll find catch weight, and each box or item coming in may be a different weight. So typically you want to identify the weight with that. Also, do your suppliers provide mixed pallets with multiple products, multiple lots on a pallet, so that you only put one barcode on the pallet? Do you have to put a barcode on each item that's on the pallet? So those are all questions you have to address in terms of being able to do that, starting with the receiving. And then you need to be able to record those activities as they go through the various business streams or processes. So from the warehousing through the consumption, the production side coming out, as you're producing product and putting into the warehouse and shipping. And you need, probably the scanners, the printers. Also depend upon your facility. If you're in a farming type environment, do you have connectivity where you're maybe gathering the crops? Or if you're in a remote warehouse, how are you recording that information? So all those typically have to be taken into account. We typically like to do a pre-barcode survey to look at all these factors to see how well a company could implement a barcode solution. And Rich, I know you've been involved in implementation of a number of these as well. What additional comments or thoughts would you have in terms of readiness for barcoding?
Yeah, the technology piece is actually the easier. It's the standard aspect that you touched on. What granularity are you going to apply? What barcode standard are you going to use? There's been a huge improvement in terms of the amount of information that can be captured on a barcode with QR codes and other improving technologies. It just gets back to just like we were talking about with blockchain, like what's the data standard, and to what level are you gonna work with your trading partners versus just inside your four walls for the barcode.
Well, excellent. Thank you very much for that answer and for all of those answers today. However, we have reached the end of the Q&A portion of this webinar. Now, if we couldn't attend to your questions, the team at Aptian and Adroit will follow up with you, or if you have further questions, you can direct them to the email addresses that are up on your screen. I want to thank everyone for participating in today's webinar. You will be receiving a follow-up email from XTalks with access to the recorded archive for this event. A survey window will be popping up on your screen as you exit, and your participation is appreciated as it will help us to improve our webinars. Now, I'm about to send you a link in the chat box, and with this link, you'll be able to view a recording of this event on this page, and you can also share this link with your colleagues when they register for the recording here as well. So I encourage you to do that. Now, please join me once more in thanking our speakers, Jack Payne and Richard Sides. I hope that you found the webinar informative. Have a great day, everyone, and thanks for coming.